Protesters who attended Black Lives Matter rallies across the country have been blasted as reckless and irresponsible by a senior government minister. Live now to political reporter Eliza Edwards. Eliza, Mathias Cormann was not holding back.
That's right, Danica. Selfish, irresponsible and reckless. That's how the Finance Minister described these protesters who took to the streets for Black Lives Matter rallies. We saw thousands of people turning out to events in major cities and regional areas over the weekend in solidarity with protests happening in the US, but also calling for greater action to address Indigenous inequality, in particular in the area of deaths in custody. We've seen more than 400 Indigenous deaths in custody since 1991, but these protests taking place in defiance of a ban on mass gatherings, also after warnings from the Prime Minister, state leaders and health authorities for people not to attend amid fears of a second wave of COVID-19 infections. The Finance Minister telling Sky News this morning that protesters have been endangering public health.
It's quite irresponsible what we've seen there. And I can't, as I think about the heartbreak of families who haven't been able to attend funerals for their loved ones because they were doing the right thing by taking the health advice, my heart just goes out to them. As they see people recklessly going to these sorts of demonstrations, that must be just awful for them to watch. I think it is incredibly selfish, it's incredibly self-indulgent, and yes, it does impose unnecessary and unacceptable risk onto the community.
Danica, there was no such rebuke from the Deputy Labor leader Richard Marles, despite advising people not to attend the demonstrations before they took place. He wasn't critical of those who did, saying he understands why they pushed ahead with these protests.
Oh, that feels tone deaf for me. And certainly I had concerns about such a mass gathering in the middle of a pandemic, and I used my voice in the lead up to the protest to make that point. But if you are born Indigenous in this country, your life stands to be materially worse than those of us who are born non-Indigenous in terms of child mortality, education, employment and incarceration. Now, I don't feel like I'm in a position to say to Indigenous Australians who are protesting against that this is a selfish and indulgent act. I felt uncomfortable about the mass gathering, but I'm not about to engage in that kind of judgment of those who did it.
Eliza, the Finance Minister has also reiterated the government's stance on GST reform in the post-COVID recovery.
Yeah, that's right, making it clear that the federal government will not be pursuing an increase to the GST rate, something that the New South Wales Treasurer Dominic Perrottet has been pushing for. He says we need an increase to the GST rate in order to get rid of less efficient taxes. But Mathias Cormann saying the government does not support higher taxes.
Well, we're not focused on increasing taxes, we're focusing on lowering taxes. And when it comes to the GST, we did have a very thorough look at this, not that long ago. And the outcome of that work at the time was that it wasn't in our interest to move in that direction. And at this stage, I haven't seen anything that would change our mind.
The federal government is looking at major reforms in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis to revive the economy, but looks like an increase to the GST will not be one of them. Danica.